In December 1998, VPD members arrested a man named Frank Paul for being drunk. He was an Aboriginal, he was an alcoholic. It was a cold, wet night in December, and unfortunately mistakes were made and he was not released in safe circumstances. The tragic outcome was that Frank Paul died. That was obviously a tragedy for him and for his family, but it was also a tragedy for the VPD members who have to carry that on their conscience for the rest of their lives. It also deeply affected our relationship with the Aboriginal people in Vancouver. The wounds are deep, and we have been working hard to heal them. One of the things that we learned in that incident is that Frank Paul probably had hypothermia. It was a cold, wet night. The circumstances were ripe for it. This video is about how to recognize these incidents and prevent them from occurring.
I'm Bruce Campana. I'm an emergency physician at Vancouver General Hospital. Hypothermia can be caused by a large number of things, and the obvious one is obviously exposure to cold. Somebody who's not properly prepared for cold, not dressed for it, and is left outside for a long period of time is going to get cold. The risk factors become important, therefore. Somebody who's intoxicated, whether from alcohol or drugs, is at higher risk for hypothermia. It is almost impossible, in fact it is impossible, to tell if somebody is just intoxicated or if they may be hypothermic. And certainly in the field, it's impossible. You may have somebody who smells of alcohol and make the assumption, and usually be right, that they're just intoxicated. But there are going to be some people that are going to be hypothermic and intoxicated. And in fact, alcohol, of course, is a risk factor for hypothermia. Somebody who's intoxicated will not appreciate the fact that it's cold. They may be unconscious and lying in a cold area or outside. Somebody who's intoxicated has what we call vasodilation. Their blood vessels expand. They get flushed, their heat goes to the outside of their body, and obviously their heat dissipates faster and their body core temperature drops faster than somebody who hasn't been drinking. So they're at not only higher risk of dropping their temperature, but they're at higher risk of not appreciating that that is going on. So when you have the apparently intoxicated person, it is good as much as you can to get a medical assessment of them and make sure that that's all that's going on. Keep in mind, intoxication is from drugs and alcohol, but it's also from hypothermia and from low blood sugar. All those things have to be considered when you see a patient like that. Severe hypothermia is one of the hardest things to deal with, both from a first responder or a law enforcement point of view and from a physician and hospital point of view. These people appear dead, and it is often impossible, certainly in the field, to tell a dead person from a severely hypothermic person. Anybody with a body core temperature less than 28 degrees has severe hypothermia. They may not have a pulse, they may not be breathing, their pupils may be fixed, they're cold to touch, they may even be stiff, and it looks like rigor mortis. An adage that we use in emergency medicine: nobody is dead until they're warm and dead. If you have somebody who's cold and appears dead, unless they're obviously dead, if they're decapitated, if they're eviscerated, if they have signs of obvious decomposition, let them go. But if somebody looks intact and they're cold and they appear dead, you've got to call for medical help, and they need to be brought to the hospital. In the field, you come across somebody that you think is hypothermic. They're acting in a bizarre manner. You found them in a situation which is very suspicious for hypothermia. Maybe a very old or a very young person, a person in a cold room, a person who's been on drugs, and you think, you know, there's something more going on here, and they feel cold. You need to get their cold, wet clothing off. You need to get them in a warm environment. You need to, if you can, cover them with warm blankets. Even with paramedics, it is essentially impossible to tell the difference between hypothermia and intoxication. And it's very important to remember that they often go hand in hand.
So the lesson that we've learned from this is that hypothermia can occur in circumstances when we might not expect it. Even in a city with mild climate like Vancouver, except on the warmest of summer nights, our temperatures do get quite low overnight. And if you're dealing with someone who is wet, it is easy for hypothermia to set in. So what we're asking you is to err on the side of caution. Remember the symptoms that have been explained to you, and if you suspect hypothermia might be involved, call for medical assessment. We have a responsibility to protect all of the people that we deal with, and hopefully the lessons that we've learned from the Frank Paul incident will help you do that. Thank you for your attention.